recent book was a novel. There's something else brewing that hopefully we're going to get to read pretty soon. And we are in good hands this morning. Breanne will be leading the conversation with Justin. So that's all I need to say. I'm going to get out of the way so we can start, hand over to Breanne, and have a wonderful session and a wonderful day at the festival.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, great. So welcome to this session, one-on-one with Justin Haynes. I devoured Ibis when I got it. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's this book that's at the intersection of so many genres, like historical fiction, political thriller, horror. It's at the intersection of countries, Trinidad, Venezuela, Grenada, the US, the intersection of centuries. And I have been dying to talk to Justin about this book. And I'm so happy to do it with all of you. So Justin is a Trinbagonian writer. His work has appeared in various journals, including the Caribbean Writer, Pre, and Caribbean Quarterly. As Nicholas told you, his debut novel won this year's OCM Bocas Prize for Fiction, and Ibis was also awarded the 2026 Penn Open Book Award, as well as the 2025 Los Angeles Times Prize for First Fiction. And in 2027, Justin will be a fellow at Civitella Ranieri. He currently lives in Atlanta, and he teaches creative writing and English literature at Oglethorpe University. So to kick things off, I'd like to invite Justin to read to us from Ibis, and then we're going to dive into a conversation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Breanne. That was lovely. If it's okay with you, I did some standing last night, so if I'll just sit and read for you, I hope that's okay. The section I'm going to read for you to start with, it's about this group of fishermen. They're kind of ne'er-do-wells. They're not very nice people for the most part. They're Trinis. But there's a woman here called Bunny, and Bunny has taken in Milagros, who's a young Venezuelan girl, a refugee who has come across with her mom. And Bunny and Mickey, who's one of the sort of roughneck fishermen, they have recently started a romantic relationship. So they've sort of formed a found family. Milagros and Bunny and Mickey. But what happens is that an ancient curse seems to be haunting Bunny's house, and she thinks it might be connected to little Milagros. So she sort of suggested that they have to leave Trinidad, and the solution they've come up with is to go stay with a family friend in Grenada. But before all of that happens, they're having a conversation, all the men and Bunny and Milagros, about what's actually happening and what they should do. And that's what this section is about. So when Bunny comes to and her eyes focus and the color returns to her cheeks, she says she needs to get Milagros out of her house and out of the village because things are happening out of the ordinary and out of her control. Say more, we urge. She watches us, still in her all-persecutory whites, and an involuntary shiver rattles through her. Tell us what happened, says Peter called Peter. Tell us what you saw, says Nello. Tell us where Milagros is, says Mickey, his face the gravest of us. It looking pale, even without the mask, his lazy eye now with a dark circle beneath it. And the rest of us thinking, please put your mask back on, Satis. Bunny eyes Mark too, who has not removed his mask, her reaching out to touch it and asking, what the hell is this? We extend some coconut water to Bunny to show goodwill and to settle her mask-rattled nerves and to show that we're serious about her health and recovery because why else would we use up our good chaser without drinking rum? We ask Mark, too, to remove his recrimination mask so Bunny won't close her eyes in fear of all that she sees around her and maybe black out again. In the backs of our minds, we know that this is the perfect time for Catherine, the great disemboweller's mother, to thunder roll in. There never having been a woman in the clearing for this long before, surely sparking Catherine's mother's spectral outrage. But maybe Haney's hatred is satiated from our recent sand episode. And what happens instead is Bunny saying again that she needs Milagros out of her house because in the past few days, these abnormal occurrences, unusual sounds, devious movements, disappearing objects, and highly suspect odors What kind of suspect odors and intrigue, Nello asks. He wears his white Santi mask on top of his head, so in effect his fake face faces the sky, and his reality-facing face faces destiny. Bunny sits atop the picnic table and hugs her shoulders. Mickey sits at the far end of the picnic table and doesn't make eye contact, but just swigs from a long-neck lager. Him never trusting our concocted babash or puncheon, only beer for him, please and thank you. Bunny explains the oddities in her house, saying that when she and Milagros returned one afternoon, that the kitchen table had been rotated 90 degrees, that her full-length mirror no longer reflected the house furniture behind her, and that a lavender perfume gently danced through the bathroom as well, Bunny hiding her face with her hands upon these confessions in the same way that she covered her face in grief at her father's funeral. Worst of all, she says, the constant depressing of bed springs at night in her bedroom, sounding like children permanently jumping on a hotel bed, making it impossible for her to sleep through the night. We've never seen her like this, and our hearts go glum. We cannot believe that we're hearing from the woman who's punched a shark, the woman who's turned down almost all romantic village advances, the woman who wore white to her father Antonio's funeral in her refusal to let any of us see her grieve in public or to let the Western standards of grief influence her mourning. Anything else, Nello asks, and Bunny says that spices have been disappearing from her spice rack and that she experiences the scent of spices in places where she shouldn't. Paprika on the beach, cardamom at the library, and star anise while walking down the non-star anise spiral at the grocery. We turn to Nello and says, this could be disappearing object phenomenon. Or this could be some little razzy-tailed Venezuelan girl playing the ass, says Hospitalis, the agnostic. We ignore him and instead focus on Nello biting his thumbnail and saying, this bears much thinking, this bears much consideration, this bears much deliberation. But when Mickey, still not looking at Bunny but concentrating on his lager bottle, asks again, where is she? Where is Milagros? We realize that we've overlooked the most important detail, the crucial element. And Bunny, not looking at Mickey, finally says, she's with Miss Titus, and our hearts return to normal. And to this point, just now, there's changing temperatures in the air with the barometric pressure dropping, and the real unexpected thunder clears its throat in a deep roll. And just to be safe, in case it's absolutely Catherine, the great disemboweler's mother, we get the hell out of there, us hauling ass out of the clear and the thunder pushing closer and closer, and us thinking there's no need to take unnecessary risks where Catherine's mother is concerned, and most likely coming to mess with our time, mess with our heads, and mess with our silent recrimination. Bunny and Milagros spend the night at Miss Titus's. The next day, we meet out in the clearing without Bunny, and we debate the situation of the extraordinary occurrence in Bunny's house. Nello's worry blossoms, him saying that this could be Catherine, the great disemboweler's mother, spreading past her unusual parameters of the clearing and spilling into the village. We think he may have a point. Us thinking that maybe this is another one of the three that Haney promised, the three curses. We cross-question Nello, asking him what he thinks is the next best natural step. He pauses for a moment, and he gives us some pourboire gratis, some words of wisdom gratis, some perspicacity gratis, while he's trying to think of next steps. Never sweep your house after dark, he says. That way you won't sweep away your life luck. Yeah, we say. Never gift your sweetie a chronometer or a wristwatch, he says. This way time won't be running out on your relationship. Yeah, we say. Never gift your sweetie a pair of shoes, he say. This way she won't turn around and kick you up your royal black backside. Yeah, we say. When a ladger bless is causing commerce, continue to wear your underdrawers inside out because you know why, and he's right. We know why. We've been doing this incessantly since Catherine the Great Disemboweler's mother's last visit, which led to all the beach sand being spirited away by a man with a shaved head. Some of us, for the first time, wearing our underwear right side up just so we can flip them and protect ourselves against obia. But what are we going to do about Milagros, Mark II said, digging our horrors, asking always him the easiest spooked among us. I didn't just tell you that a minute ago, Nello says. We turn away from Nello and walk toward Peter called Peter in his boat. What do we do about all this, we ask Peter called Peter, who's ignoring us and whistling along to a Mighty Shadow song called No. Please, Peter called Peter, we say, please. He looks up, lowers the volume on his transistor radio. I can teach you a sitting technique that will allow the ideal answer to manifest itself in your hearts, Peter called Peter says, but you may not like all that happens on the journey to the answer or the answer itself. Come na man, says Mickey. All right, says Peter called Peter, follow me. And here he switches off his transistor and the mighty shadow shucks off his tool belt and walks away from the boat he's forever building, moving toward the 2 picnic tables in the clearing that arrived one day without us knowing where they came from. Him touching our arms and our legs, bending us into uncomfortable sitting positions. Like so, he says, gently folding us into a pose he calls Padmasana, and that we call, this is real pressure, boy. All of us falling over a few times, our faces crashing into the earth before we could finally maintain the position. We are bent into this uncomfortable position, sitting down, sitting on the earth at the base of the picnic table, our legs pretzeled painfully, while Peter called Peter sits comfortably atop one of the picnic tables. Now close your eyes, he says. That's more pressure, says Hospitalis, peeking through one eye. Shut your mouth, says Mickey. The 3 points of contact with the earth are vital, says Peter called Peter. 101001, says Binary Clem. But this is real pressure, boy, says Mark II, struggling with the pose. A small man like you should be real flexible, says Nello. Remember to close your eyes and keep your back straight, says Peter called Peter. That could be real hard for Hospitalis, says Mickey. The man more crooked than a dog back leg. Why to hush your ass, says Hospitalis, struggling supremely with the pose, even tipping over before righting himself, us suspecting that the pain from the leg he was shot in is radiating through him. This would be real hard for Yui, said Mickey. Good thing he not here. He probably eating out his mother fridge, says Mark II. Why don't hush your ass, Hospitalis says. No, says Peter called Peter. Follow your breath. Relax your muscles. And how do you ask we supposed to do that, Hospitalis asks. Why don't hold your ass and stop complaining, says Mickey. We struggle. But most of us approximate what Peter called Peter instructs us to do, thinking maybe this isn't so bad. Inhaling and holding for a 5 count, then exhaling for a 7. Us thinking that just as long as we don't smell oranges, everything will be airy. But soon we learn the curse of Peter called Peter's mysticism when 15 minutes and 27 seconds into this deep breathing and spine straightening, various members of our cabal start realizing, then recognizing out loud things they should have kept remanded in their dirty, dirty minds. The pose causing us to release what becomes airing our dirty gray laundry in the public square. First Mark II, that wretch, admits that he steals nighties from clotheslines just to try them on before realizing that doing this would probably agitate the village women. Then Mickey groans and confesses that he'd bought Bunny an emerald-cut engagement ring and that he's put a deposit down on an A-line wedding dress with a princess neckline for her. And then he recognizes that this was presumptuous and he should have asked her first. And Hospitalis confesses that he's been taking money and looking the other way when Venezuelans sneak illegally into the country at the wharf, that he says take a little coke on weekends when he visits brothels, his voice completely cold and detached, as if he doesn't recognize anything. And we think that if realizing, then recognizing means that we won't do these ugly things again, then Hospitalis would probably keep snorting his way through weekends. These were things that we had already known, maybe, that we had kept to ourselves. But now we were coming to recognize bigger and more important things not related to these things we already knew. Like when in a sudden lightning strike moment of recognition, Mickey recognizes that we need to get Milagros off the island. We need to get Milagros off the island, he says. And we open our eyes and we feel something escaping like pressure popping in our ears. Well then, says Peter called Peter, unfolding himself, I think we've made a lot of progress. He bows to us with joined hands. Namaste, he says. Then he heads back to his boat, leaving us all twisted and astonished. Thanks.
So I'm sure if you haven't read this book yet, you'll be dying to get your hands on it. And I will be coming to you guys for questions after, so just a heads up so that you can get them ready. But one of the things I wanted to ask about that reading in particular was something that struck me when I read the book, which is the voice, the communal voice of the village. So we've all heard first-person narrators, but it's always I, and the speaker is a we. But amongst the collective voices of the village men, there's so much differentiation. They're the characters that we were introduced to there. Wonderful names, Binary Clem, Mark II, wonderful nicknames as well. And I wanted to ask, how did you come to the we village narration? And how did you both differentiate between all of the men and show that they are, one village community?
Yeah. So when I started to write it, I knew that they were going to have various men who are variously problematic in their own special ways, right, to make up this one very toxic community. But I didn't want any one of them to tell their story, because that person would probably be superior and probably be better and probably be good. So what I decided was that at any one point, whenever the we is being spoken, it's one of those characters who's speaking. And usually I knew who it was. There are little tells that I had when I was writing it. So I'd know if it was like Mark II who was talking, or it was Mickey who was speaking, or if it was Peter called Peter. And obviously, if their names are being called, they're not speaking. But at a certain point, I kind of got lost, and the we just kind of took on a voice of its own. And it's this kind of disembodied sort of other person within the group who's often just sort of talking. So at that point, I just wanted to make sure that I could continue to differentiate among each of them, so that when you heard a name, you'd recognize, well, this is the one who has a missing tooth, or this is the one who has rickets, or this is the one who, had been shot in his leg and, has a limp now. And that's kind of how that happened.
I think that, even in that small reading that we got, there's so much that echoes throughout the books. And one of the things that was referenced is just the generational curse, or well, they're not sure what's happened. Why are you smelling these spices? Why is your kitchen table rotating 90 degrees? And there are so many writers I think of when I think of that echoing generational curse, like Garcia Marquez or Toni Morrison. And one of the things which we might get to if we do another reading is that this story, it echoes through generations. There are other speakers, sometimes, going all the way back to slavery. There are, even within these characters, we see them, some of them, at different points in their lives. And how did you go about sort of writing across the centuries and weaving in the possible causes of this generational curse? Because sometimes somebody pops up and you're just like, wait, no, this person was alive 200 years ago.
Right. Yeah, so that was the research aspect of this. So I had to, there was a Scottish person who owned estates in Jamaica, and he ended up there. He was running his cousin's sugar estate, because previously his job was to make clothing for the British Army during the Revolutionary War, and that didn't end up so well. So he kind of lost his shirt, no pun intended, and he needed somewhere to land. And so his cousin Simon, who was back in Kirkton Hall in Scotland, was like, "Can you go take care of these darkies for me and send me the money when everything is done?" And I found out where those letters were, and they were in the University of Michigan. I was like, great, I'll find these letters. And I read all the letters in 18th century cursive with disappearing ink, and I can't read what it's saying. And then I realized, oh God, where are the responses to these letters? And then I realized that was in the University of London, so I had to go there as well. And as I was sort of reading these letters, I realized that there has to be a deeper story here. When you sort of take a people across an ocean and you start to take away things from them, you take away their land, you take away their names, you take away their language, there has to be something that they hold on to that's personal to them. But the other thing that they're going to develop is they're going to develop a lot of recrimination and a lot of rage. And I think that recrimination and rage kind of seeded itself at a certain point, and eventually became personalized and just made its way through the centuries. And I think what happens is that history tends to repeat itself. We know that. So there's some human trafficking that occurs, obviously, during times when people are enslaved. But that's happening now as well, when Venezuelans come over here, and you can just read the newspapers and see these devastating accounts of people. So then it became the task of me trying to make connections across the centuries. It turns out it wasn't too hard. That evil sort of replicates itself in very familiar ways. We are not devising new ways to be evil, right? We are seeing things happening now in contemporary times. If you just open a history book, you're like, oh, right, that seems familiar. So there's an unfortunate lot of precedent that I could sort of turn to, and that just sort of made its way into the text.
Yeah, so John Cruikshank, he's the character in the book, because there's a character in the book who's writing letters to his cousin. And he is one of the most dislikable characters. I mean, rivaled by his brother, Finley, who is also a piece of work. But his voice is such an important one. And one of the things he says, so when he arrives on the plantation, he says, just after the Negro supper, I gathered them together, had Shan select one of the biggest specimens, and bade Shan to truss him to the post and deliver 25 lashes to his back in plain view of the others. So he wants to make a point. And then, later, he's beset by a mysterious illness, and his brother Finley suggests that, maybe he might be poisoned. And John says, why would anyone want to poison me?
Right.
And he is this dreadful mixture of cruelty and obliviousness, which, to Justin's point, might seem sadly familiar to a lot of us. And can you talk about what it was like to write from his perspective, to get into his head? Because it feels very convincing, and you're both in pain as the reader because you know that this is based on something true, but his humanity is still coming through, his desires, that he does want to get married as well, So what was it like to be in his head and create him?
It's a really great question. But before I answer that, his brother Finley is a true person. But his real life name was, wait for it, Hercules. And I was like, I'm going to keep that because that's fantastic. And my editor was like, no. And I'm like, but his name is Hercules. She said, no. And I said, but. And she said, give him a Scottish name, find a Scottish name, we'll use that. But I said, but Hercules. And she said, no. She's like, no one's going to believe it. I'm like, but it's in the letter. She said, no. Anyway, so the reason that I wanted to read both letters, both accounts, both in Michigan and then in London, is because I had no desire to use my creative energy to try to get into this man's head and try to think like how he would think. So it's not a case of plagiarism. Like if you go read those letters, you will not find matching details here. But it's familiar enough. It's in the neighborhood enough that I just didn't feel comfortable sort of wanting to come up with anything new. I learned the cost of an African person several times in those letters, and I learned about other things. They just casually say I went to the sort of market block and I purchased a Negro for like 10 guineas or something like that, and then they'll be like, how is mom doing? Just like in the next line, because it turns out people were very unhealthy at that time and were dropping dead at very young ages. So a lot of that I can kind of internalize and mimic his voice without expending a lot of creative capital, because that was really hard to actually write. And it was one of the sections that I wrote quickly because I just didn't want to have much to do with him other than having him here. But the other part is no one who's evil thinks they're evil. They're like, oh, I just want what's best for my country. We'll just take this oil. It's just making this country great again. Just ship these people off to Africa, even though they're from South America. Doesn't think he's truly evil. By the way, I'm making this person up. This is a hypothetical person, not a true person. So no evil person truly thinks they're evil, and they also have what they consider to be, their personal humanity, their personal wants and desires. So he's thinking about his future. He wants to be paired up with someone and just abandons everyone at the end of it, which I think sounds about right for his personality. But that was true to his persona as well. Like in his letters, he was like, "How is Margaret doing back in Kirkton Hall?" And he's just like, "Bought another person for 3 guineas and had this person whipped for insubordination." Like, this is astounding, but that's how it happened.
Oh, thank you so much for that, and for just sharing the human cost sometimes of writing these characters. I think this is a great moment for us to hear another short reading from the book. I am literally so excited to hear what Justin's going to read, because if you just come to this book at different points, you will get different voices, different situations. So could you set the scene for us?
Yeah.
And just give us another short reading, please.
Yeah. So this is a shorter passage. And this is young Milagros. She's grown up and she's trying to find her mom. She became a journalist, part of the reason why. She's trying to track her mom down. And she goes back to Venezuela and she's having no luck finding her mom. But she's finding little crumbs, little clues, little ideas that she might be around or she might not. She runs into a childhood friend, a friend from the family from a long time ago. And the childhood friend says, my mom and your mom were close. And she may have some letters that she may have written, sort of thinking that she may not see you again when you guys, she had this sort of foresight. Anyway, so this is Milagros. She's gone. She's in a hotel. She's had no luck finding her mom. And then she gets a phone call, and it's her mom calling her. So this is that section. It's just after 2 a.m., and Milagros is still chasing sleep, flipping her pillows for cool spots when the bedside phone rings. She wills it silent, but it won't stop. Whoever's on the other end knows that Milagros is here, that she's awake, or else she's determined to wake her. Daniela, her friend, she thinks, is calling about the package, about her mom's package, and Milagros lifts the receiver, but it just keeps ringing. She slams it down, snatches the cord from the wall. She wraps the cord around one hand, grips the chassis of the phone tightly with the other, strides over to the window, hoping the view of Caracas will settle her. But even with the cord ripped from the wall, the phone won't stop ringing. It continues to jangle impossibly in Milagros' hand. She touches the bite of quartz that now dangles from the necklace on her neck. And as soon as she does, she knows who's on the other end of the phone. And she answers, and her mother, Gracia, says, "Mila," when Milagros puts the receiver to her ear. "Mommy." Milagros' chest tightens. This is some sort of trick that combines with her current drunkenness. "You're home," Gracia says. It sounds both like her and not like her. "Yes," says Milagros. She doesn't recognize her own voice. "I'm here to see you. Where are you?" "That's good. You did a good thing for that little girl, Mila, getting her to Colombia." The line coughs with static. It intensifies when Milagros moves closer to the window and heals when she retreats toward the bathroom. Milagros' sinuses chime. Tears are on their way. "Where are you?" Milagros asks again. "I'm here," she says. "I was on the island for a while, but I'm back here now. When can I see you?" "Not right now, but soon." Gravel flecks Gracia's voice as if she's been drinking along with Milagros just a few rooms down, as if they just missed each other in the hotel's hallway when they went to clunk ice into their buckets. It's a voice that's crawled beneath loops of barbed wire to get to where it is now. The crackling noise escalates then, gremlins in that phone line, and Milagros moves further toward the bathroom, the static retreating when she steps into the bathtub. Milagros briefly excavates herself from the tub, looks out at the lights of Caracas from across the room, tightens the phone against her ear. "Mommy, where are you?" Gracia doesn't respond. After a moment, she says, "It's good to hear your voice, Mila." Milagros clutches the phone tightly, sets it down, pulls the quartz pendant from her neck, and when the call disconnects, the image of the static-filled TV screen flashes across her mind. Milagros snatches the pendant back up, but there's still dial tone. She keeps the receiver tight to her ear, tells her mother's absence of the things in her life, her job, living in Brooklyn, about her girlfriend Juanita, about how much she misses her. All the while, she clutches the cord so tightly that when she releases it, an imprint remains nailed to her palm. There's an ache in her chest as she tells of her hurts and her hopes. As she talks, she feels that giddy sensation of her feet leaving the ground once more, and she closes her eyes and lets the sensation have its way. In the morning, a knock. Okay, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. So there are just some wonderful female characters in this book. We had talked a bit about, the men in the village. And Milagros, she's a character that we meet at different stages of her life. We see her through the village's eyes. We see her through her own eyes. And she's somebody who experiences different types of migration and homecoming. She's at times, an illegal migrant, an asylum seeker, a legal migrant, and, later a reporter who's trying to cover the sort of dark underbelly of the Venezuelan crime world at great personal risk. And just to intrigue you, she also encounters some fortune-telling parrots.
Really briefly, I was walking around the savannah this morning, and apparently Trinidad runs 5Ks every day now. Did you know this? So I couldn't walk on the savannah, so I had to cross the street by the botanical gardens, and I walked past the Emperor Valley Zoo. And as a child, I used to go there a lot, and there was still that huge cage with all these parrots in them. And I'm like, that is where those parrots came from. They were like in the back of my mind. There's like 7 or 8 parrots just sort of imprisoned in this cage. And I'm like, that's where these periquitos, these parrots, and they're like screeching at me. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I feel trapped too. Don't worry. But I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
Like the Emperor Valley Zoo, inspiring literature. But no, I'm just really intrigued with the various migrations Milagros endures, both when she's a child and the decisions are made for her, and later when she's an adult and she can make those decisions herself, especially against the backdrop of the world in this book, which we may recognize, where a lot of time migrants are, villainized. And we see that, by the way, not just with the common thing in literature where you see migrants into the U.S. villainized, but also migrants into Trinidad being villainized as well. So can you talk to us about, how you portray these various migrations?
Yeah. The section with Milagros sort of finally making her way to the U.S. and becoming a refugee, there was a point when you can kind of just ask for refugee status, and if you can provide evidence as for it, they would sort of, take you on and hear your case. That is not a real thing anymore. And like when I read that section again now, I'm saying, this sounds so false and like such a false note, but it was at one point a way that things can happen. Milagros, like you said, moves from a position of having travel decisions made for her, to ones that she's making for herself. But oddly enough, she just wants to travel back home. She just wants to go back to Venezuela, which she only knew for a very brief period of time. And so I was very conscious of trying to create like a full circle kind of bookend moment in the book, that at the beginning she's leaving, and at the start she's kind of returning at the end, and that was kind of at the heart of that.
And, I think that many characters in the book face, in different ways, these very difficult choices. So Milagros faces a version of a choice, which is, do you want to go back to this? Or do you want to just sort of blank it out? And those choices, they're kind of focused in this character of Mama Binti. She's where we first meet her as this supernatural figure who offers enslaved women an impossible choice. A little bit of a spoiler, but, if you're pregnant, would you give up that child for a living child? And to me, she read as this figure of like pain intermingled with hope, and the reminder that nothing is free, especially freedom. And then we see, different characters facing a version of that choice. What will you give up? What will you trade in exchange for what want. And I'm curious about, how you sort of created this wonderful polyphonic character of Mama Binti and the ways in which she interacts with various characters over the course of the book and over many, many years to sort of give people like a crucial but impossible choice.
Right, yeah. So Mama Binti, when I was a child, we used to play all these various kinds of games, I'm sure. And one of the games we'd play was, no one remembers this, we probably made this up, it was Mammy Bushu. And so I was like, Mammy Bushu, and I was like, that became Mama Binti. But Mama Binti is, one of the things I was really concerned with in the book was sort of the various philosophical understandings of love and, devotion you can give to people. So it's like storge, it's like philia, it's like agape, it's like eros, and there are various versions of that throughout the book. What is it? Agape is kind of like the divine love that is given to unconditionally toward people, and I wanted Mama Binti to kind of represent that. Eros is romantic love, and there's a lot of failed versions of that throughout the book. What else is there? What did I mention? Storge. There's kind of a parental love that's given as well, and that's kind of at the heart of the book. That it's this mother who's making all these sacrifices for her children, and then there's philia, right? That's that kind of brotherly love, and I think that's the love that these fishermen eventually, as terrible as they are, try to extend to protect Milagros. But I wanted Mama Binti to represent that kind of selfless love that you give to people. And we know people like this. We know these very altruistic people who we tend to want to be around because we want to be better people. And these are always excellent people. On the other end, we have those people who are always complaining, and we don't quite know why we still keep them in our lives, but we do. But it's because we need balance. You have that really excellent person on one end and that other person who's like a little problematic. Always, glass is always half empty. But I wanted Mama Binti to be that kind of, that giving without thinking kind of person, even across generations, like their life is completely in service to others.
Yeah, that is, I cannot even emphasize how much I'm only scratching the surface with these questions. I'm going to be coming to the audience in a little bit, but there is a question that I want to ask that actually Dax and Teresa, we were talking before, and they asked it, and I said, it's on my list, because of course the book is called Ibis, got beautiful Ibis on the cover, and the very first line of the book, when everyone saw the scarlet ibis perched atop the once notorious house of ill repute near the edge of the village, there was a collective shiver, although no one would admit it. Take that, you got the scarlet ibis, you got the house of ill repute, and I'm so curious, what was it about the scarlet ibis that drew you to it as one of the anchors of this book? At what point did you know the ibis was going to be a central figure? Because ibises, well, birds in general are very important in this book, but you will see different incarnations of the ibis. So what was it about this bird that drew you?
All right, so two things. Ironically, thinking about those poor birds sort of caged there, the idea behind it was that birds, of course, have freedom to go wherever they want, right? Freedom to move across borders. In the northern hemisphere, when it's too cold, they fly south. When it's warm again, they fly back north. No one cares about birds sort of transgressing boundaries. People we have a big problem with. But the ibis is really important because I was thinking back to the 1960s when a lot of West Indian islands became nations and had their own sort of trying to formulate their own identities. And I was thinking about like what that national identity looked like and the ways that we did it. Last night Nicholas talked about Pat Castani writing our national anthem. We have like our coat of arms. Our coat of arms are held up with, Coquelicot on one side and the scarlet ibis at the other. Fun fact, when I was drafting this book, the book's title was actually Together We Aspire. And then that just got pushed to the side. It was part of that whole kind of nationalistic thinking. But, and I thought the bird was the most organic thing. We have watchwords, we have, discipline, tolerance, something else. Discipline, production, tolerance. But all of those things felt very inorganic and sort of made up, whereas the coquelicot and the scarlet ibis felt very organic and natural to the actual land. When I was growing up and we watched TDT and they would sign on, they'd be land of the scarlet ibis, home of calypso and limbo and whatever it goes on there. So I was like thinking about all those ideas of like national identity that we sort of formulated early in the 60s. And it was when I was wrapping up this book, something really kind of remarkable happened. I realized I sort of very much keep up with the news when I'm away. And I found out that we were actually removing Columbus's 3 ships from our coat of arms, and we were going to put the steel pan on there. And I was just like, that's remarkable. It only took crossing across a century to figure out that might be a good idea, sort of remove that kind of colonial footprint. But I just wanted the bird because the bird was here before us. The bird will be here after us. The bird we're here with the native, indigenous people were here. And that's kind of how I settled on it.
So, I love that. And I think if anybody has ever gone to the Caroni Sanctuary and at sunset and just seen that image of the ibises, it's just the sky turns red. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. And I love that idea of just drawing a symbol out of nature. So I think we're getting close to audience questions. I have a ton of questions here if anyone doesn't, but I want to make sure that everyone has enough time to ask. So if anybody does have a question, okay, yep, up in the front.
You project, and if they can't hear you, I'll repeat your question.
So, actually, I've not read the book as yet.
Okay.
It's 2 statements. One is, today is International Dawn Chorus Day.
Wow.
So, woke up at 4:45 to hear the Dawn Chorus.
Ha.
Just in my house in Cascade, it was amazing and, and wonderful. So very opposite that we're talking about this today. And the second thing is about those macaws right there in Emperor Valley. So I hate to see birds in cages. And when they started letting the macaws free over the past few years in Port of Spain, I look out for them when I used to go and run around the savannah. And you hear them before you see them.
Right.
And there's something about having knowledge that you don't know you have.
Yeah.
Now, that cage is right before the pedestrian crossing.
Yes.
And all my life, I was born in Sinclair, lived there until I was 7 before moving west. All my life, I have heard those poor macaws shrieking
Yes.
in that cage. And when I heard the noise of the macaws, I knew it was macaws because I always knew what macaws sounded like. And I didn't know that I knew it, but it was a sound associated with incarceration and now glorious freedom. And I understand, I've never been to Venezuela, but I understand Caracas is full of wild macaws. When I was a kid growing up in Port of Spain, we did not have the wild parrots. They're everywhere. And I'm hoping and believing that very soon Port of Spain will be full of wild macaws as well. So it's just some statements, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book.
Right, thank you. I was reading the newspapers a couple of years ago, and someone had lost their bird, their parrot, like it was a domestic bird, and I think it was like McGuff or something, and people were spotting it throughout the neighborhoods, and it was like flying about. I'm like, this is the most fantastic thing ever. Like McGuff, poor McGuff. I think it finally found its way back home, but yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Teresa. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, there's a hand there.
Yeah, so I did read the book, and I think it's impossible. That's a PhD book, right? I could write a PhD about that book. And it took me to reading Patrick Chamoiseau's Texaco after.
Yeah.
There was something about it that I kept hearkening, like Chamoiseau. But one of the themes that is coming out in pretty much a lot of Trinidadian and Tobagonian books is the lack of institutions produced by the state and the need for the citizens to create those institutions as a place of protection or whatever, and the fumbling that we are doing through it. So coming across that idea and how does conscience play into that, and seeing how you're working with that in the book. And then also so I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Okay.
Because you describe this human creation of institution throughout. And the other places, like the research on Venezuela, like, how did you get there? Because it's the only thing that's totally unfamiliar to me, and that I don't know if you had lived experience in it. Where did you come from that? The rest of the stuff is a little more familiar to my kind of lifestyle. Yeah. So I think, considering that I could write a PhD about this book, but these are two things that jumped out a lot to me.
So I'll answer the second one first, and you'll probably have to remind me of the first half of your question, because like a sieve. But to answer your first part, people who read the book early on, specifically my agent, said you need to have this person be in Venezuela, and I was very wary of doing it because I've never been to Venezuela, and it wasn't a very propitious time for me to travel to Venezuela. And so what I would do is more research. I would go online and look at blogs and translate them very painfully because my Spanish no es bueno, and just kind of get a sense of what they're going through on their daily lives, reading some of their newspapers and translating that badly and trying to get a sense of, what their life is like, just going on local Venezuelan blogs and seeing what's important to them. That's pretty much how I did it. Your first question is about
coming out of citizenry,
right,
as opposed to, when I say citizenry, people,
right,
and communities, as opposed to state.
Yeah.
Because in all the countries, you kind of don't focus on people standing in line. There's that mention of the refugee thing. But other than that, it looked to me like a description of people trying to create protection.
Yeah. Mostly I'm kind of an even keel person. A friend was reminding me that last year when I was at Bocas, I told her that my koan of living was that, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But when it comes to institutions, I am deeply pessimistic about NGOs and various institutions that are set up to be helpful. I think they do more harm than good. Well, that's not fair. That's not true, and that's not true across the board. I retract that. We'll fix that in post. But I do believe that I'm very wary of the word of charity because it has this kind of resonance of looking down on someone or being condescending. But I think community is probably what saves the day all the time, right? People sort of looking out for each other. And I think in the back of my mind, I always had the sense that Trinis in particular are incredibly communal. A few years ago, I met an aunt and they were like, "Do you remember your Aunt Anne?" And I was like, "No, and why is she Chinese?" And this is a thing that people in Trinidad do all the time. They take people in. They take people into their homes, and Nicholas again, always in my every creed and race, right? It doesn't matter. You have family members who look like you, don't look like you, people who've been, found family, people who've taken in, and I think that was always with me, that there is a kind of, at the heart of it, for Trinidadians in particular, this kind of generosity, this kind of graciousness toward each other. Like if you're really in need, someone is going to help you, within that, and I always cast that gimlet eye toward institutions and what they can do. So I hope that helps. Yeah.
Okay, so we have another hand right there. Yeah.
I don't know if this is a question more than a comment.
Okay.
I absolutely loved at first I read the book and I was a bit confused, but when I got into the letters in slavery,
yeah,
I found they were wonderful because they told of such appalling things with such a light touch, that the person is talking about doing the most incredible things, terrible, terrible things, and yet I guess it's normal for this person. And I thought, you say you didn't have to use a lot of your creativity to do that, but it was incredibly creative to be able to do that and to get into that person's mind and express it so well. And the same thing happened in the village. In the village, when they did the most incredible thing to the visitor, was he a journalist?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They did the same thing.
Yes.
And yet they kind of, at first, it's not really mentioned, and then it sort of comes out, and you realize this is appalling, but somehow it's done with a very light touch, so that and it's how people justify things to themselves. Sure. And I thought that was very, very, it was very significant to me. I really enjoyed that part in the book.
Thank you. I worked really hard at that. One of the things I talked about in my workshop yesterday is that people who we think are truly, truly bad and maybe sort of reckless in ways that they don't recognize that they're being reckless in the ways that they are, but they're also, I always want to recognize the capacity for people to be redeemed, and for people who maybe can recognize their shortcomings or their failures to do better and to be better. And I think that's one of the things I really wanted to get toward the end of the book with a particular character. So I really appreciate you sort of recognizing that's something I actually worked really hard on trying to get. Complexity of characters, especially ones who superficially we would think of as not very good people. Thank you.
And can I just say on that early scene with the reporter in the very first chapter, because I'm not going to spoil it for you guys who haven't read the book, but it was really just introduced so casually.
Yeah.
And I went back and I reread it and I said, wait, what happened to him? And there's this great quote, like I wrote it down the first time I read the book, which was like, I think, needs must when the devil drives. And I was just like, yes, isn't that brilliant, the way people justify what they do, you know? Because it just encapsulated so much of you know, why you think you have to act in a particular way. And then, just like you said, it echoes and echoes and echoes through the book. So we're almost out of time. I actually think possibly the best ending for this is a final reading, you know. Oh, that face. I
just don't know if I have something that's short enough that would be appropriate. I'm happy to do it. There's over 335 pages to choose from.
We can take another question instead, and there's somebody who's got a
that's a high hand.
Got a hand there.
And that looks like a troublemaker that I know. So this is going to be a question that I cannot answer. So have at it.
Is it on? It's on. Okay. It's a question that I asked last year.
Oh, good. I still don't have an answer.
That you didn't answer last year.
Okay,
so
good. Let's
asking again.
Keep putting me on the spot. I spent all year thinking about it. Let's go.
Well, you've been spending the year reading in other places, right?
It's true.
Doing a lot of readings in other places. And what I asked you last year was, what does it mean to read here?
Yeah.
And you've read different pieces this time around.
Yes.
And in choosing, maybe, I don't know if you thought about what it means to read here. So I'm asking, what does it mean to read your first novel? What does it mean to read here at home?
Yeah. Okay, this time I can answer it. And thank you. It means that when I read in other areas, I do not read passages where what Kamau Bradford would call the nation language. I don't read those passages because they're not going to understand it, right? They're not going to know when I talk about Mako business or Sukuya or anything like that. So for me to actually be able to read here and people know what it is I'm talking about, that it's exhilarating because I know I can lean into it. I can turn up the way that it's pronounced. When someone says, yeah, we, you know, I'm leaning into the yeah, we, and everyone will be like, why are they saying yeah twice? You know, those sections I won't read for people who are not familiar with it. So it is tremendous for me to be able to do that here because these are sections that I usually cannot. They don't export well. They don't travel well. You know, I tried it once and I looked out into the audience and I can just see confused looks on these faces. And I'm like, the book is confusing enough. Just let me tell you parts that you can understand. So yeah, thank you. That's what it means.
And just speaking of looking out into the audience, yeah, I think one of the most wonderful things about Bocas is just looking out and seeing how engaged everyone is. Like, nobody's down in their phones, like people are listening or like laughing and nodding. And like I've been coming for many, many years, and you guys as an audience are always so wonderful. So as we wrap up, a big thank you to all of you, not just for coming, but for literally showing up and being so present, and for loving the books like this one. A big thank you to Justin, who has been incredible. He will be available to sign Ibis at the book signing table. So please go and get your copy signed. Just give him a couple minutes to get there. We might have to take some pictures at the end. And books from all of the festival writers are available in the atrium. So all that's left is a big, big, big thank you to all of you and to Justin. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Breanne. Thank you for doing this.